But I think that, even then I was always really, I don't know, just, interested in the kind of underdogs, and interested in what was kind of, you know, what was championing those artists that, like, did deserve attention, but maybe just weren't going to get it anywhere else.
Chris, hey, how's it going? Thank you for coming to the Question and the Answers podcast. How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So this is Chris Appelgren, who at one time was the CEO and kind of leader of the ship over at Lookout Records, as well as a member of the band The Pattern, and who since then has been going on and doing a lot of artwork for bands over the years. And I'm really excited to have you here on the show because as a huge fan of Lookout Records, back in the day, gosh, like that's a label that I think is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And, being able to have a chance to kind of talk to you about your experience there, both the good times and, the bad times, I think is going to be kind of illuminating for a lot of people. So, Chris, right out of the gate, tell me a little bit about, what it was like to really, kind of be at Lookout during its prime.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's thank you for that introduction, and a lot of, I think, what you're describing of like the cultural significance of Lookout, and certainly like the that kind of explosion of amazing underground and punk music coming out of the East Bay, East San Francisco Bay Area, starting at the end of the 80s, and into the 90s. I was 15 when I got involved with Lookout, so I was really a fan, first and foremost, and it was really kind of an amazing experience. I mean, it really sort of engulfed all of my kind of teenage years and my early adult years, and so it's hard to kind of think of a way to characterize it succinctly, but it definitely kind of looms, I think, big in my story, and it it's like a big part of kind of how I understand myself, even still, so many years later.
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, having been involved with a label that, for lack of a better word, is pretty legendary. I mean, gosh, I mean, everyone knows obviously the ties with like, bands like Green Day and Operation Ivy, Screeching Weasel are a couple of like the really most notable bands, that were on there. But a ton of artists that aren't necessarily always affiliated with Lookout Records do have ties there to a degree, like whether or not it was like part of a compilation that you guys did like way back, in the early days, but also some bands that towards the later end of the Lookout years, moved on to kind of bigger and better things like, for instance, Engine Down or Pretty Girls Make Graves, and there was like this interesting sea change that happened, kind of post you taking the reins, and I really wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit because, prior to you being the one at the helm, it seemed like the focus was really on like the kind of pop punk kind of, the scene, and like a lot of it had to do with like the East Bay or the Bay Area in general. But then you kind of expanded to that. And, was there a particular reason why you chose to go down that route?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the world seemed to kind of, and the scene seemed to kind of be growing exponentially, laterally. More Gilman-like venues in towns all across the country and in the world. More scenes of homegrown bands. Uh, kind of doing interesting stuff, or in some cases, really, taking a more pop-like approach to punk. After I think the intensity of the '80s, and so part of it was this feeling like, Lookout wasn't ever really um, based around a sound intentionally. It just would that these were the bands that were, kind of, you know, important and seemed significant enough to document from the East Bay scene. And you could think, you're looking at the really early stuff like Neurosis and Yeasty Girls and Corrupted Morals and Isocracy, Operation Ivy. All these bands were really so distinctly different from each other, but all of them really kind of made sense in this context. And I think that some of the kind of elements that really tied the label together was just this sort of this like let's do it ourselves mentality. Let's also do it as economically and cheaply, thinking about the Xerox copied covers and and bags. I spent hours and hours stuffing 7 inches in that kind of way. So it really was kind of this belief in what we were collectively doing and in the future that we could create, and the idea that there was there we were doing it for some kind of not necessarily expectation of success in kind of classic terms, but just that it was important enough to do. And I think that by the mid '90s, and really I guess it was '97 when Larry and Pat, who had been kind of I had been kind of a junior partner along with Patrick Hines to Larry Livermore, the founder, when the two of them kind of decided that they were ready to move on from owning and operating a label. And the world had changed. The Warped Tour had launched, a million other labels that were probably more business savvy and sophisticated, had sprung up, after Lookout, and maybe inspired by Lookout. I'm thinking of, Fad and Hopeless are kind of two really successful examples of labels that, kind of came up in the wake and sort of proved that you could do something different than kind of like the Epitaph, mini major model, which is, no problem with, but was very different than how we approached it. And so, it wasn't kind of an immediate plan, but there was an idea that I had that Lookout should not sort of focus on being only true to this aesthetic sound that was associated with it, like I think Fat Wreck did in the '90s, but instead should sort of try to find new and interesting and ideally like important artists to document and work with. And it's a more ambitious, and probably a little bit ridiculous sounding now, but I think it was the impetus uh, for like working with the Donnas and Avail and Ted Leo, and even some of the the later bands, you know uh, things like Hockey Night or Troubled Hubble or Engine Down, things that kind of they weren't really associated um, with Lookout, but we just really believed that these bands were just really excellent and doing something that we wanted to be a part of. And they had the right kind of approach to it, kind of a people first approach. They appreciated what the label was doing, and in all honesty, like we continued working with many of the banner bands, but it became much harder to kind of like maintain those relationships. I think uh, without kind of getting into the specifics, it just, I think that there was this idea that we should be, as a label that had been associated with like Green Day and Operation Ivy success, we should be able to recreate that very, easily for many bands. And I didn't know how to do that, and Larry certainly didn't know how to do that. I mean, it would have been a much different proposition running a label. The label would probably still be here, if that had been the case. So in a way, it was just sort of like, let's continue to kind of look at this as a community now, more of a community that's expanded beyond just the specific regions of California that we live in, but is this connected community of bands, and let's expand on that rather than doubling down on an aesthetic sound. And it was something that even when Larry was there, we would get in arguments, about certain bands. But a lot of it, interestingly, as you can kind of look back on the whole catalog, some of it, still stands out like a weird anomaly. And other artists kind of make sense and fit in. I keep thinking of like the bands like the High Fives and the Ne'er-Do-Wells and all these groups that sort of like originated in northern Humboldt County, that we just loved at the label, like Larry, Pat, and I, when we were doing it in Larry's bedroom. But they didn't sell many records. Brains TV, never sold anything. And but I think just our, now you can hear it, and you can hear the connection to a band like Sweet Baby Jesus, because they both had Dennery brothers in Brains TV, and you can sort of make that connection. But I think at the time it was like, what is this weird thing? Or even a group like Pansy Division, when we first put out their record, it was like, really, I remember there were, but kind of before the internet was, and I'm going off on a tangent, but before the internet was, such a big thing, we used to get kids that would call the label. They'd call our office, and we just would kind of spend time on the phone with them because, I don't know, why not? They're asking questions, we're interested in talking about whatever we're up to, and they seemed interested enough to ask. And a few people I've actually sort of maintained friendships with, years later. But I can remember there were these fans of that were in Berkeley to kind of go to Gilman, and Pat and I went out to lunch with them, and then brought them back to like the very unimpressive Larry studio apartment, Look at Records world headquarters. And they were asking if we had any videos, and the only video we had was this Pansy Division video that they had, like, I can't remember who had even kind of produced it for them, but it essentially was just a lot of fairly hardcore porn, with a little bit mixed in with a little bit of the band performing, intercut with that. And it was like maybe it was like their sort of parody of Bill and Ted. So it kind of had some, anyway, it was just this really thing where we, these Midwestern kids, that was like, oh yeah, we have a video, we showed them that video and kind of blew their mind in, whatever, 1993 or 4 or whatever that was. But I think that, even then I was always really, I don't know, just, interested in the kind of underdogs, and interested in what was kind of, what was championing those artists that, like, did deserve attention, but maybe just weren't going to get it anywhere else. And so that is, I guess, one line that sort of carried through from when I was kind of making A&R decisions. And certainly there's records that, like, maybe in retrospect wouldn't, I don't know, we wouldn't have done. I can't think of anything specifically, but some were sort of more challenging. I think in the wake directly of Larry's, kind of retirement from the label, I really tried to restore a fairly broken relationship with Ben on behalf of Screeching Weasel and the Riverdales, and that just ended up kind of not ever accomplishing what I hoped it would. So yeah, certainly by no means a shortage of regrets, but I think that I still relate to the approach that I had, which was to try to do something memorable and interesting and unique, in the same way that what Lookout had started out doing felt really unique and unexpected. in 1987.
Yeah, I mean, so I read Larry's book,
Yeah.
and having been somebody who was, listening to artists on the label, kind of not so much from its inception, but I'd say relatively early on. Like I remember the first proper Lookout album that I ever purchased was the Can of Pork
Mhm.
compilation, which
Awesome.
is pretty awesome. I mean, it's got like Lagwagons on there, like what is it, Downfall is on
Mhm.
there, and yeah, it's just a ton of bands. And um, obviously, I mean, when Green Day blew up, I mean, that just like it blew up everything, and then all of a sudden you're listening to like Kerplunk and like all that stuff. But um, you know, seeing how things kind of eventually unfortunately unraveled, and like hearing it from like Larry's perspective, and like that whole situation with like Ben Weasel, where, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong and maybe I'm misremembering this, but wasn't it something like you tried to like kind of appease him by kind of giving him the option to pretty much have his own sub label? Wasn't that part of the whole thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was sort of, I mean, I guess the simple way to put it is that like when, when Larry left, there was this kind of ongoing dispute with Ben and Screeching Weasel over how, kind of like his interpretation of, or how he interpreted our recording agreements, and sort of like how Larry, interpreted them, and what the intention was. And it, in reality, the sort of like the difference, it's probably a little bit too complicated to get in, but the real true kind of like um measurable difference in terms of where they were was really negligible. And I remember like I flew out to Chicago, to try to talk to him. I spent hours on the phone, and I felt like I was a little bit caught in the middle, because we had this we had this kind of language in all of our agreements that said that, both the label and the band, the people that signed this contract, agree that the truest contract is like friendship and honesty and trust. And, each party agrees to treat each other, with that. And I felt like there was, this kind of adversarial um, pall that had fallen on everything. And Larry, we filed suit against the band to reinterpret the contract. It wasn't a suit where we were seeking any kind of monetary damages, so we weren't trying to take money. But Ben felt very threatened by that, and like, we don't have the money to pay for a lawyer to even respond to this properly, so this is a power play move. And but ultimately, I think Larry hoped that a judge could resolve this misunderstanding. And um, and so what, again, it sort of escalated a departure that Larry had been kind of planning on, or threatening, and promising, depending on how you look at it, for some time. Um, and my response to that was like, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna execute a new contract with Screeching Weasel. He wants to start his own label. I'm going to put up there's a dispute where he thinks he's been ripped off and owed money. Rather than trying to sort of like forensically determine what that is, we are going to just underwrite this first record on his new label, and we'll distribute that label, and sort of like that was kind of like the way that I was hoping we could resolve it. Was like, hey, let's just, instead of focusing on trying to respond to and answer what had happened before, let's just move forward. We'll, renegotiate these terms so that, um, you know, they don't feel locked in by an agreement that, doesn't feel like it's in spirit to what they thought they signed. And let's also, you know, exhibit some consideration to the success that they brought to the label by helping them, build something new. And so that was kind of like how, Lookout was instrumental in helping support Panic Button. And it just was kind of like I mean, those sort of like manufacturing and distribution agreements, deals, they never really, um, I don't think they're a good idea, unless you are a major label with endless, endless, pockets, or money, that resources. Um, Ultimately, some of the records sold well, others didn't. Our margin was pretty minimal because we were using our distributor to, and so they took most of that money. So we were, mostly covering our costs. And then when a record wouldn't sell, we'd be the ones sort of like, out of pocket in a real sense, in terms of, all that manufacturing costs. So ultimately, it didn't make things better. And and then it got to a point, I can, not immediately, but after a few years, and like certainly the early 2000s, where Ben was like, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to sell the label. And my thought then was, well, the best way to sort of like keep the family together is for Lookout to try to buy it. And so that was like kind of upping the stakes financially even more, to sort of, I felt like we were, kind of having to prove our love and value. And ultimately didn't get anything out of it. We ended up kind of like, just, we completed the sale, but it really decimated any kind of cash reserves that we had to do that. And then, I don't even know exactly what the reason was, if it was just like a late payment or something like that, but ultimately they just decided to pull their records anyway, and they had every right to do that. The Screeching Weasel did, all the Lookout catalog. So, yeah, it was just, that's one thing I would, I would do differently. If someone like, it's like a breakup. If someone like is not happy, you got to let them go. You got to let them go.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think that there's a lot of different things that people could point to as to what was maybe like the biggest catalyst as to like the quote unquote downfall of Lookout Records. Like some people like, say, well, once Green Day and Operation Ivy pulled their stuff, like, obviously that was like a huge cash surplus that was just now gone, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, how do you have like any kind of other bands that you can point to that are even comparative, in terms of like the number of numbers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's, it's really, I mean, it's really accurate. I mean, I appreciate Larry's, faith in me to kind of like lead the, kind of like a new era. But I don't think I was very well equipped for that, from a business, a real kind of deep understanding of like the, what we needed as a business, and how, I mean, really, I think his interest in moving on had a lot to do with the fact that like that wave of like the early mid 90s had sort of plateaued, so we weren't growing anymore. And in fact, we started the beginning of a decline, and that decline became, more steep, despite some really, doing some really great things. I think that so me thinking that like I, I could make a decision, um, with, a business decision, and not really thinking about, okay, well, where am I going to actually sort of like, can I even make that decision? Do I have the right to, um, buy out Panic Button? I didn't really, and that was the thing, is it was sort of like this idea that, at some point, sure, there would be the money to sort of, distribute to its rightful owners, but ultimately, what I was doing was sort of, choosing to create new obligations rather than meet the existing obligations. And it was also, it was, it wasn't just, um, bad deals, or deals that didn't turn out to be very smart, and records not selling as well. Um, I think it was also just the idea, like, we had built this staff, we had built this team, and and that was a pretty, big responsibility, kind of to maintain that. And so, you know, um, it really was like, okay, well, we are trying to sort of keep this together with the idea that like something will happen, that can sort of help restore everything, and that just didn't instead of getting better, it was sort of like we were trying to manage what I think was a really negative trend in terms of music sales, and a position that the label had gotten itself into, which is like we were not new, we were not really like a bedroom small label. We sort of like any artist that we worked with had an expectation that we were going to do a certain number of things like to support their records. And we had moved distributors, because bands wanted to be in chain stores, and that really just didn't pan out either. And so we were paying more money to get our records into stores. So it just was like it was a lot of things. And I think what I learned through that personally was just the idea that that of really what was what decisions were mine to make and which ones weren't. And also being able to sort of like identify what's happening much earlier and admit to myself what was happening, much earlier, which I think I did. And that was also, I think, part of, what contributed to it not working out in a big way. And, it absolutely was kind of, Green Day sort of saying, we're sort of done, and then Operation IB sort of saying the same thing, that where we just realized we're on this, we're sort of trying to keep all the plates spinning, and not doing that great of a job, not making anybody really happy. And it was really, then that we kind of, put the brakes on and really just, shifted to just supporting remaining catalog for a while, and then ultimately, kind of letting everything kind of come to a close, which, in a way, that was the option, on the table in the mid 90s, when Larry and Pat and I kind of talked about it. It's like, maybe we, if this isn't growing and more successful, if our kind of fearless leader has lost interest, maybe that's what we should do. And I felt like that was a disservice to the bands. And it's funny that like there's an irony that I feel like, maybe I did to some of our bands, maybe I did more of a disservice, by being there, by trying to be there. So yeah, it's it's an interesting thing, and it's I think that I certainly learned a lot and was kind of humbled by that experience. I mean, there's something, we had a certain amount of kind of like audacity, being this kind of small, tiny upstart that was so successful, and seeing so much kind of rapid growth where, I could remember feeling like we had some kind of, there was something, really unique and important about what we were doing. And I don't think that that's not true, but I think that the reality is that that's not enough, to sort of build a sustainable success.
Well, I think what's the old saying, like the path to hell is paved with good intentions, and
There you go.
Yeah. Here you are. I mean, like, because you were at this point, like in your mid-20s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're in your mid-20s, like you had been working at this label since you were 15 years old, right? So you were a kid,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I don't know what your background is like from an educational standpoint, but like I don't know if you went to school for like business or anything like that, but like probably not having a ton of actual formal experience, except for like trial by fire, in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. I did not have any. I mean, I basically kind of left school to focus on the label. Kind of. It just was not as interesting. I graduated high school and moved to Berkeley to kind of commit to the label full time, and go to UC Berkeley. But I was not as focused on school, and sort of kind of faded away from that pretty quickly, and focused all of my attention on Lookout.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, shoot, I know so many people that wanted desperately to get Lookout's attention.
Right.
Like I play in Tsunami Bomb now as like the new guitar player, and the bassist Dominic Davi Like he was telling me that like early on when the band first started, that was their mission, was to get on Lookout Records.
Right. That's so
And,
funny.
and I can't blame them. You know, I mean, shoot, at the time, Lookout was the label to be on. You know,
Yeah.
especially for a Bay Area band. You know, because
Right.
Fat Records had the Fat Records thing going on, and it was very like, you know, niche. You know, for like that skate punk kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple of other like Bay Area labels that were kind of doing their own thing. Like Asian Man had what Mike was doing, and then like there
Yeah.
was like a couple of like there was a ska label, you know, or two here or there, but you know, but otherwise like Lookout was like the label to I mean, it was virtually like you guys, Epitaph, and then like Alternative Tentacles in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Along the three big punk labels, and well, and
Yeah.
then you had like Nitro and Fearless and Hopeless as they peppered up, but gosh, I mean, what a legacy, you know, I mean, gosh, you know, I mean, when you look at the catalog, it's super robust. There's a ton of great bands on there that, to your point earlier, are completely outside of the realm of like that pop punk kind of, you know, aesthetic that is so ingrained in people's minds. Like when they think of Lookout Records, like they think, oh, it's Green Day, oh, it's like Screeching Weasel. It's like, but dude, there's Neurosis. Like, are you kidding? Like Neurosis is like the craziest shit out there, you know? And
Or
you guys
Phil's.
had their earliest stuff, you
Yeah.
know? And I mean, that in and of itself is like this huge deal, because when you hear from people like Billy Joe Armstrong or those guys, they're like, dude, Neurosis is like the band that everyone fucking loved, you know, back then. And I mean, that is a huge compliment to, I think, what you guys were trying to do as a label, even from the earlier onset. And I think that it is testament to what you were trying to do after you kind of took the reins and tried bringing in bands like Pretty Girls Make Graves or Engine Down, who were a little bit more on like that indie, almost emo kind of like semi-alternative kind of post-punk kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
So you didn't really want to be like this one-trick pony. And, you know, I think it is hard to capture like well, what is it like, you know, like lightning rarely strikes twice in the same place kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when you have something as massive as Green Day that happens, and then in your case, Operation Ivy, you know, and even like earlier Rancid stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
That's a huge win for any label to have had. So
Yeah. I mean, I
go ahead.
agreed.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I mean, you're right. And I think that, you know, in many ways, like it's a pretty, you know, high bar for, you know, for kind of setting expectations. And I think that the reality too is that, you know, um, the kind of the business of how we wanted to work with these bands, of doing a 60-40 split in their favor, you know, those were they you know, in terms of kind of running and, you know, kind of setting a good example, they make a ton of sense. But I think that they don't align with probably what you would see from some of those like established labels. I think a label even that started independent would have a more conventional like royalty structure, you know, as a means of you know, kind of making sure that they're buttressed against the imminent, you know, the failures that you're sure to have, you know, those records that just don't sell. And Lookout never did. I mean, in a way, you know, I know Larry is very proud of you know, kind of the deal that we had with bands, and you know, probably, you know, we did move to a more standard, but I think still generous kind of like royalty calculation with some of the very later records, just because it's a lot easier. I mean, it's almost like we were partners with these bands. You know, we had to create P&Ls, you know, quarterly, and it just, you know, and so like as a record was more successful, it became cheaper to produce. You know, you produce higher quantities, you're selling more, your costs go down. But then also, you know, there's the percentage that you are paying that band also increases. So, you know, the cut there. And so, you know, in a way like that, I think is, you know, I don't, I mean, I'm not planning on, I put out a record, you know, for a friend's band, you know, kind of like, you know, and, you know, so I have you know, a kind of a label I do with, Andy from Nuisance and my friend Frankie, called Mouth, that did one record. But I would not, I don't think I'd approach record making in the same way that I did. And I think I learned, like, hey, this is not as sustainable. We're actually kind of probably losing money being, having only these 2 or 3 records that are really, generating 85% of what we're bringing in, in terms of our, it's, in fact, like the economy of that it is not super sustainable.
Yeah, so I run my small record label. It's basically just me running it out of my apartment, and
Yeah.
I've been doing this now for like 10 years. Had like a couple of years, like kind of a hiatus in between, but going into it, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who had his own label for a number of years, and I just kind of casually asked, "Hey, do you have any advice for somebody like doing this?" He's like, "Yeah, just don't do it," and
Yeah.
and I think it's kind of like this cliche now where, like, most labels, I would say, especially like very small independent labels, like they're never going to see like any profit. Like when you really break it down, you might strike gold with like one release that does really well, and then if you're lucky, like that might kind of by proxy like shift into other bands that you're working with. But my approach has been pretty much from the get-go that I try to do like partnerships with bands as opposed to like deals,
Yeah.
and I try to position it as like, hey, like I basically want to be like the silent partner in your band, right? Where I'm there to kind of like help you, but I'm not here to like manage you. I'm not here to like manage the success of your release. Like that's really your job still, but if I can somehow be an additional asset to that, like by either providing you with a little bit of cash up front to help pay for the records and do some footwork for you, maybe get you in front of some other people, I can do those things. But the rest of it, like I'm just not interested in that stuff, like going into high level gear with like a label or anything like that. But I mean, it would be awesome to be able to propel Heart into a position that's even remotely close to like what Lookout had. But even then, like it's kind of intimidating, like when I really think about it, because it's like, gosh, like when I think about like the amount of units that you guys sold over the years with even like some of the smaller bands, like I can't even fathom like pushing out 1,000 copies of one album. And for
Right.
you
Well,
guys,
it's such a different world now. I mean, you have to think that it was also, it's also so much easier. The information for how to do it is widely distributed. That was like a secret code, that you had to crack in order to do that. To produce something, not as complicated as it would seem, but it's become a lot easier, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But it kind of like creates a more lateral expansion, and especially with those labels that are kind of trying to maintain sort of like a staff, and kind of a level of support. It can be really challenging to sort of like ride those waves and crest. And I mean, think so in a way, it's interesting that to look back on it, there is kind of like a correlation. You can look back at like the emergence of rock and roll and all those like regional labels, and that were studios and labels that put out records that became these regional hits, and then ultimately the major labels, the big players at the time, came and bought out the contracts, and and signed away those labels, or put more of those bands and artists, and ultimately there's something similar to kind of like all the punk labels that came around in the 90s. It's like a label like Epitaph or Hopeless really were successful at kind of recreating a lot of the mechanics of a major label without necessitating, without the requirement of being one themselves. And that is great, but it's sort of like it becomes this binary choice, like that's how you can succeed with the music industry, when you sort of want to with as it exists, or you can do something else totally inspired, in a different way to help, document something, do something you love, create a work of art, help a band or an artist create something that is a work of art that you believe in. And that's much more that's always what I loved about it. I mean, always, throughout my time, I look at my passion was sort of like the kind of the visual piece, and so getting to work with bands in that kind of way, was something that I really enjoyed, and I felt really lucky, has kind of continued beyond the label, and it's not as I don't need to be on the hook in that kind of way. I mean, I'm always excited. I mean, I've kind of, one example is I continue to kind of work with Frank and the Mr. T experience, like, as a kind of a creative collaborator, and doing a little bit of like administrative work, but mostly out of friendship and out of, kind of belief in the band, and kind of like, an investment that's different than the one I made, and, kind of responsibility that's different than being the label guy, and it's a lot nicer, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, I think that, there's still, I think, labels, small labels, and, punk labels, and just all kind of underground labels are going to continue to be vital. But I think you're right to sort of have the right kind of expectations getting into it. You're more likely going to end up with a lot of boxes of records in your garage or your closet. If you do want to start something, focus on distribution, early on. I mean, I think that's what kind of made the difference, for Lookout was Mordam Records, and it was a kind of a combination of not only being able to make things that people were interested in, but also a means to, get them out into the world. And that was something that, I know is also really, really precious. And it was more precious, in 1990.
Yeah, it does seem like having access to distribution, like physical distribution, was really what could make or break you when you were doing like anything in that capacity. Because I mean, let's face it, when you're in a band and you don't necessarily have the capacity to tour all the time everywhere, but if you can gain access to the record stores in, say, like Wichita, Kansas, but you're from the Bay Area, like that's a huge piece, because word of mouth travels, even prior to the internet, but it doesn't mean that you're just going to all of a sudden show up in Wichita and play a show,
Yeah, exactly.
But people are still interested in the music. So
Yeah.
that's a huge benefit to them. And I mean, nowadays it seems like distribution is a little bit harder to come by. I mean, depends on like, the bands, or like how many units you're making, and traditionally how many units the band is selling, and so on and so forth. Like I don't have any physical distribution.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'm also not dealing in like large quantities of records, and I don't have bands that tour all the time, so
Right.
a little bit different. But
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were kind of involved with like some of the artistic stuff that was going on, and like you've done that since then. Like you've actually been working with a lot of bands, working on like artwork and such. One of the bands that I know of for sure that you've done some work with is the Once and Future band. Yeah, and like those albums are great, and the artwork is great. And I mean, is that something that you've been like consistently doing, or has it kind of been more like every once in a while, like you'll kind of jump in there now?
I mean, I will kind of do it as often as I'm asked. I don't. It's not something that I'm. I mean, I don't think if anybody wrote me a check, I would turn it down. But it's not something I'm doing like as a job. It's it's something that I just do because it's exciting and fun. So, really my kind of that working with Once and Future Band started when a couple of friends and I really had the idea of kind of putting out a record by them, and really thinking like this is such incredible. They're such an incredibly musical group. what could we create that would sort of like do justice to this band. And so, the kind of their first record, Brain, we did like a small run of those on this little, kind of label that we had called Mouth. And, it's an EP, but we made it gatefold and, kind of like,
Spent
so
way too much money on
yeah,
it.
exactly. Uh, but it was, we're kind of doing it more as like kind of like this piece of art and this statement. Totally the opposite of how Lookout operated, but it was a lot of fun to do, and really I was honored, that and just kind of coming up with ideas for the artwork. We sort of settled on that cover with the kind of Pillar group, and when they ultimately ended up getting signed to Castle Face Records, they reached out and said, we want to kind of continue this theme. And so it was an opportunity to sort of like also continue developing that, and we talked about kind of records like Journey and ELO that sort of like had a visual motif that would grow from record to record, or Chicago, these kind of bands that also musically had some connection to what Once and Future Band were kind of inspired to do. So yeah, it's been fun, to be able to kind of continue to do that. And then at the beginning of COVID, I've been talking to their drummer Raj about kind of like helping try to animate some of the indie art, and we ended up kind of like working with them to kind of create this whole 8-bit video game style video that I animated and I guess produced because I just did it mostly alone, for one of their songs on the new record, called Problematic. That was a lot of fun to make, and again sort of just afforded by the fact that I had a lot more time at home on my hands. But yeah, I mean, I think it's yeah, I mean, I an old friend of mine, from this band, Beachwood Sparks in LA, and out of a group called Gospel Beach. He started a label called Curation Records, and I've helped him with some of just the construction and design of some of the releases on his label. I just sort of, yeah, I guess have friends that will kind of seek me out, whether it's just taking art and putting it into the right format for pre-press, or actually doing a little bit of design help. I think like another local punk band, Smokers, like old bandmates of mine, Jim and Andy from the Pattern, along with other good friends, was like, hey, here's our art, and so I helped like build the labels and kind of take the elements and put it into the format so that they could kind of print it in the way that they wanted, and helped generate some different color variations, as they were trying to pick out what colors they wanted. So, I enjoy that. It's kind of, it's just sort of a way of, maintaining, contributing to the community that I care about, people that I have known or know, or just, I'm excited by, so yeah, there's no rhyme or reason to it. And, I think I've, when I look, especially back on like the kind of the Lookout stuff, I can see like the sort of like painful mistakes that I've made, the things that I didn't know about how to build something properly or design something. But I feel like I've been lucky to kind of continue to do that, and to do some really fun projects. One that was really kind of great was Mr. T Experience did this record, MTX Forever. That was this sort of like gatefold, retrospective, double record. And Frank and I just had a lot of fun kind of grabbing elements from all their different records and kind of bringing them together into this new thing that sort of pay homage to the record sleeves that designs that we've created before. And then we actually made like a functional MTX board game on the inner gatefold that's
That's awesome.
playable. That was just and stuff like that. Those things that are kind of little what ifs that become like kind of fun design challenges or artistic challenges, or I think it's still a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, actually. I'd never thought of that. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, that's great that you've been able to, like, stay busy and stay interactive with, like, the scene and, like, music scene. And I know that you were in this band called the Pattern for a number of years as well,
Yeah.
and that lasted for like what, like 5 or 6 years, 7 years, something like that.
No, not that long. I'd say probably 3. It was
Oh, it was
kind of
long.
like, yeah.
Okay, got
We did some singles and kind of like an EP and then an album. And kind of tried to maintain, but I think um yeah, we were not I don't know, it was kind of near the end of Lookout as well. And we put out our records all on the label. Maybe a mistake to put out your own band's records. but but yeah, I mean, that was a good time, an interesting time, because it was, like, it was sort of like that moment of those kind of small scale rock bands, kind of garagey sort of rock bands, finding bigger success. And, I think that even within the band, there were some of us that sort of thought that it was going to, we were going to be sort of like more successful than we were. And it was the label guy in me that was always like, we should be really appreciative of everything that's happening, because this is, there's lots of other bands who don't get this opportunity. But ultimately we kind of fell apart, because I think that there was almost a sense of disappointment, like, we're not doing as well as this other band is right now,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, it was a lot of fun. Feels very dated. It feels very of its time. When I look back, for sure.
Do you still play any music at all? I mean, like, obviously, like, right now with COVID, like, nobody's really, doing stuff. But I mean, are you involved with any other musicians and, like, doing any
Yeah,
projects musically?
actually, yeah. So, mostly with some of the people that's in my own kind of group of friends that have played in bands over the years. With Andy Asp, who was also in the Pattern, and Carson Bell, who played bass in the Pattern. The three of us play with 3 other friends in this kind of band that's mostly focused on playing, like, weird 60s and 70s cover songs. Right now, although I keep really pushing us to do our own music, but it's kind of become this joke where we've learned like 40 called Soft Notes. And that has been a lot of fun. I'm playing drums and we're all singing. But so yeah, it's still important to me to kind of like to play music and do that. But I think my expectations for, even for myself, like I probably, I've got 2 little ones at home. I'm not going to be doing a lot of touring, that sort of thing. Not that anybody is now, but I don't expect to at some point, be back on the scene the way that others I think will be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great though that you're still doing some music, and I mean, when things kind of get back to quote unquote normal, I mean, do you guys expect to, like, perform live, like, doing, like, these covers?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, we play around. We try to, kind of find the most offbeat places to play. So we played around in Oakland and the East Bay. I just like got, something on my Facebook that, like, last year today we played at Golden Bowl in downtown Oakland. Sort of like the midway between Christmas and New Year's, $5 show. So yeah, we will definitely do it again.
Nice.
Who knows when.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I mean, I live in Berkeley, so I'll come check it out if you guys play it again.
Awesome.
But
I will let
um,
you know.
I'm sorry. What did you say?
I said I will let you know
Oh,
when
sweet.
we're,
Yeah.
if
Sorry.
we're playing again. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that whole thing where we're cutting over, but no, that's awesome. And so I like to kind of ask these questions to everyone who I bring on to the show. Being somebody who is relatively plugged into the music scene, like, who are some bands that you really like that you think people may not be aware of, but they totally should? Like, can you name like 3 or 4 bands that you think people should try to pay attention to?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like if it's I guess it's hard to think of like the proper context, like in terms of um new bands, and I know we talked about this before, and we're like, I you know, like was I going to get stumped and stand here but I would say, let's think. I'll think of, I have a pretty um, wide array of uh, music that I'm listening to right now, and what I've kind of like super been into uh, is is I love the Beach Boys,
Hmm.
and there's this Japanese guitar player, Tats Yamashita,
Hmm.
who is a huge Beach Boys fan, and he put out these records in the 70s. One in the 80s called Big Wave was a soundtrack to like a surf film, and another one in the 70s called Add Some Music to Your Day. It's like half Brian Wilson covers, and so that's something that I guess I would recommend if anybody wants to get weird. I'd say also Sarcasm, the band, local East Bay band. That may be super obvious to some folks, but I just think that they're really great. I got to know Alex, the bass player, when he was putting together the Lookouting kind of little festival at Gilman a couple of years ago, and I just think that they're awesome. I got to do a 7-inch cover for them and do some illustrations for their newest record, but definitely a fan. Let me think who else. There's a band in LA called Secret Stare, that I think are really, really awesome. Sort of, gosh, hard to characterize, so I won't. But sort of like a little bit like great guitar playing, and a little bit like reading an old 70s horror paperback in terms of like their kind of aesthetic.
Hmm.
um yeah, those are the main ones. I mean, I I guess it's dumb. I just have been I've mostly like because of this band, have been listening to like a lot of like trying to unearth weird, you know, uh 70s songs that we can try to cover. And so like one is this great guy Richard Clapton from Australia. He has a song called Girls on the Avenue that's just sort of like a great lost pop power pop song from the late 70s. So that kind of stuff.
No, I mean, that's cool. Like when you can really dive in to like the unearthed, or like the stuff that's been like buried for a long time, and like really kind of come up with like some really interesting music that, by and large, like isn't pop, but
Hmm.
could be, like if you like heard it with the right ear at the right time or something. But um yeah, I mean, that's rad. I mean, Sarcasm are great. Like those folks are really awesome. um and so the last question that I tend to throw out to people, and I know it's like this, ridiculous question, but I'm always interested in what people have to say. If you could only have 5 albums to listen to for the rest of your life, or like you were trapped on an island, like what would they be?
um I'd say This Year's Model by Elvis Costello. um Probably Give Enough Rope by The Clash. um I should say Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys, but I I'm gonna say um, the Beach Boys Today, which is a couple records, couple of albums before that. Honestly, The Word Is Law by Neurosis is still a record that stands the test of time. And then just because I'm cheating a little bit, I will say the Shit Split by Blast and Filth, just because those are a couple of the greatest bands, and then I get 2 for 1.
There you go. Yeah, no,
Is
that's
that
awesome.
5?
Yeah,
I
that
think
was
that's
5.
5.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, a lot of people have mentioned the Clash, like when I've asked them, and Elvis Costello's come up at least once, I believe.
All right. Well,
I
I'm
don't
glad
know
I'm
if
not.
anyone's ever mentioned the Beach Boys or not. Neurosis has not come up, and it's funny, like the Shit Split. I remember I threw it out there on social media one time. I was like, "Hey, what's your favorite Split record of all time?" And that got mentioned many times,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's a great record.
yeah, yeah. Well, Chris, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and like, I appreciate you, kind of giving me your insight to, your time with Lookout Records and kind of the historical, aspect of that. I'm stoked to see like what comes out with like new artwork that you're going to be doing or any music that you're going to be doing. And yeah, man, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I hope you have a good rest of your year, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks so much, Andy, for having me. Appreciate you letting me blather on for a long time. Hopefully it was, interesting and informative and not too meandering. And yeah, just thank you, and best of luck with the label, and with, continued success with the podcast.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you later.
The man